My name is Michael Dana. In 2008, I was diagnosed with a rare brain cancer, and after 6 years, I was cancer-free. But the ordeal left me changed, with a different outlook on life and a new sense of priorities. While still recovering, I earned a degree in economics from UNC Chapel Hill. My studies taught me to analyze data and open my mind to see things differently. I also started formal training in the martial arts to better defend myself and use it as a means of extreme physical therapy. Since then, I've obtained black belts in 3 martial arts. I own and run a martial arts school and have logged over 51 teaching hours. To my friends and family, I'm a simple business owner. But to the martial arts world, I'm something else. I am Sifu Mike, and this is Dragon Theory.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well, and this episode might as well be titled Story Time with Sifu Mike, because that's what I'm talking about today in this episode is stories and the different things that people will tell you to actually lend credibility to their martial art or to the technique that they're teaching. So that's the topic of this video, is basically adding credibility. So if you're interested in starting a martial art business, make sure to watch this thing to the end, because I'm going to be giving away some marketing advice that you will be able to kind of figure out as I'm talking and addressing these certain things. So, going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about stories, alright? Everybody in martial arts has all heard them, and we've repeated them, and some of them are awesome and glamorous and great, and they might in fact be totally made up, right? And so when we apply certain logic to certain things, you start to wonder, this may not be completely factual, it might be just the stretching of the truth, bending the rules, and maybe they lost certain details over time as of being constantly repeated word of mouth, because that does happen, and then you get something that's more along the lines of like legend and folklore than it is actual facts. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be talking about is the actual start date of when a martial art is formed or founded, right? Because we all have those different things. In fact, I alluded to it in one of my previous videos where I talked about lineage of like, hey, I'm taught by this guy, this guy, that awesome dude, right? He's awesome. He's a well-documented founder of a martial art, right? Well, the problem becomes he's well-documented. So his birth date is documented. So you can take the birth date and you can take the start date and you can do some simple math, right? Addition, subtraction, whatever you like, and find out that, oh wait, he was like in his 20s when he founded the martial art, or he was 14 when he founded the martial art. I mean, they're kind of on the young side, right? They do this to backdate it to add credibility. Not saying that you can't form martial art when you're really young, just the probability is low that all the martial arts in existence were founded by prodigies, right? Most of the places, they like their martial art to be taught or founded by some like old monk in a temple somewhere on a mountainside kind of deal, you know, not some dude who just graduated high school, right? It's done because they want to have credibility, okay? And again, not saying they're bad, right? In fact, some martial artists, when they formed their martial art, they had black belts, and they got their black belts in like a year. That's probably because the amount of techniques that they had to learn to get that is not the same as the amount of techniques that you have to learn to get your black belt now. I think now like the average is like 7 years or something like that. Back then, it was like a year and a half. Right? It was just a different context. Same name, different context. And I go over that a lot in a lot of different videos. Address that later. But we're adding credibility to the actual martial art by backdating it, even if it's like 5 years. Okay, this is done all the time in a lot of businesses, especially in the last 100 years. All right. A good example is Washburn guitars. Right. You know about those things. If you look into the history of Washburn guitars, and I know this because I have like 5 Washburns, man, I love that guitar company. they claim to have been around since like the 1980s, or no, not 80s, 1890s. Sorry, dyslexic. All right, long time. Okay, and they're not wrong. That's a legitimately accurate thing. The thing is that I think around in the 70s, that company that had Washburn guitars actually went out of business and they stopped producing for like 20 years. A different company then came along later, purchased the rights to use that name, that brand name, and started manufacturing more Washburn guitars that are very similar but completely different than the ones being made before, right? And then they were able to say, hey, we've been making guitars, Washburn brand has been around for 100 years or whatever like that, even though there was a gap in between them and they were made by two different companies. They did it because it lends more credibility to that particular brand that has been around for so long, that has been well loved for so long, instead of saying, oh, we've only been around for like a year, right? So they purchased a brand name and used that to add credibility to the product that they have. Now, Washburn guitars are phenomenal. I recommend them. I have, like I said, 5 of them. They're awesome. Going back to martial arts. Okay, so talking about stories, that's lending credibility to the martial art by backdating it for financial purposes because, hey, it sounds better. It's more glamorous, right? Another thing you'll run into, and I've run into it a lot, right, is basically stories about the individual techniques being taught, right? And I've heard the same story, just different names about different things, and it all revolves around going to a bar, picking a fight, and seeing if the technique works. Okay, and that is grand. Okay, that's awesome. I love it. I've said it myself. Several people have also repeated it. It's a really good story. The thing is, it doesn't quite hold up to the amount, the quantity of times someone actually pressure tested a technique like that. If it's 1 or 2 techniques, awesome. But if it's like 60 techniques, you got to start to wonder. But like, hey man, like I've worked at a bar, and I know if someone came in and repeatedly started fights, then I wouldn't let them come in. I'd be like, dude, no. Patrons are going to keep everything safe, right? Keep the person out. So it doesn't quite hold up to that. And plus, bar employees, not necessarily the owners, but the employees, they kind of all know each other in an area, so they talk. And if like somebody is consistently going to a bar and picking a fight to see if it works, then everyone else is probably also going to know about this guy, right? So it doesn't quite hold up there. And where's the police in all this, right? You gotta be a pretty crappy police force not to be able to find a serial assaulter that is using techniques that are very specific to one particular school in the area. And so when you start applying those things, it's like, okay, this is a good story. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm saying it probably didn't happen as much as most people think it did. Okay? But again, that kind of thing, that level of pressure testing kind of deal adds credibility to the particular technique that they're teaching, right? Done for business purposes, right? To sell the person on the technique that they're teaching. The last thing I'm going to talk about is statistics, okay? Ooh, that's a bad word, right? You know, everyone's like, oh, this is going to get really boring, but the thing is, like I said, from a marketing standpoint, I'm an economist, I know this stuff. You never really want to use a statistic that doesn't promote what it is that you're selling. Okay, again, we're trying to add credibility to your art, either an individual technique or the whole thing. You're going to use a statistic that supports it. Now, what is a statistic? Basically, think of it as the numerical representation of majority rule. Alright, so if you have like 9 out of 10 say this thing, then that's majority rule. That number indicates that most people, 9 out of 10, is going to like that. Now here's the thing, you can manipulate data to back up and support whatever you want, whatever thing. So like you might have 9 out of 10, but you might have 10 sets that equal 100 sample size, right? And so you can take all those, say like 9 out of 100 actually say this thing, but then everyone else says this thing. So we're going to just take that and just portray this in one set of 9 out of 10 say this thing because that supports us, right? And nobody's really going to call you on that, especially if it's something that's kind of insignificant, right? If it's a big deal that's pertaining to a lot of people, and there's financial stuff involved, then yeah, there's going to be people that spot check that kind of stuff all the time. When it's very simply nothing that nobody ever knows about, like a martial art, you know, again, I'm good because this guy you've never heard of is good because he was taught by this guy, who was taught by this guy, who has a page on Wikipedia, that kind of thing. That's how kind of insignificant some of this is. So they use statistics to add credibility to their martial art, okay? Because statistically speaking, you can add credibility to anything you say simply by saying the words statistically speaking, okay? Nobody's going to be really fact-checking that and backing it up and seeing, hey, you know, what is true and what isn't, right? This sounds great, all right? You have all these statistics that say, hey, this thing and that thing and this thing, but where are you getting these things from, okay? Who's doing that, the survey or the research or all the stuff collecting that, and how big is the sample size, because that makes a huge difference because that can determine your context. Be like, okay, only people in this state say this thing. Okay, well, that's this state, we're in this state, so what are these people saying? So it's that kind of deal. But the statistic is used to add credibility because most people aren't going to argue with that, especially if they're completely ignorant of everything. They're like, oh, wow, okay, so this thing does make sense, right? But the thing is, if they're completely ignorant of it, you can say whatever you want, right? If say they've never had Italian food at all, they don't know what it looks like, they've never tasted, never seen it, right? Have no concept whatsoever of Italian food, right? And you give them a spaghetti and call it a lasagna. They're going to be like, oh man, this is the best lasagna ever, and just eating nothing but spaghetti. And then maybe they go somewhere else and they find, oh wait, these guys, that's not Italian food, that's not lasagna, that doesn't look like the lasagna that I had, okay? That's because they don't know, right? And that happens all the time, okay? It's just the using the number to back up whatever it is that you want, all right? You can fit any data to meet what you're trying to sell. So if I really want to sell something, then I'm going to use a statistic if it's something that nobody knows. Now, if it is something that a lot of people know about, then another really common business tactic, and this is some of the marketing stuff I was talking about, a common business tactic is to get better by tearing the other person down, right? By tearing the other product down, it's going to make me look better. I'm adding myself credibility to whatever I'm teaching by tearing them down. If they're completely ignorant of it, a statistic works very well because then you don't have that negative, like, I'm tearing people down. I have this thing that's like, supposedly people are reinforcing the fact that I'm amazing, right? And so you have these unverified statistics all the time. And sometimes they're not even like, when I look at data, it's not just the data that is presented, it is the lack thereof, right? So when you have to look at the lack of data, you wonder why does this thing not exist when it should? Okay, so one of my favorite statistics that is quoted all the time, especially by grappling places, is that like 90% or so of fights end up on the ground, right? There is no historical record whatsoever that happens. In fact, there is nothing that actually tracks the fight as it progresses, okay? It's always going to be the end result. Now, the thing is, there are organizations that track every minute detail of every little part of every fight that it has happened, that they put on for almost 30 years, right? Those are the cage fighting organizations. They have this amazing statistical data on, like, even just the very type of punch or the submission or whatever that a person does. They, more than anybody, would have the ability to put out a statistic that correlates to, or that backs up, like 90% of fights end up on the ground because we've got these 30 years of data that say so. thing is, they don't, that doesn't exist, and it's not in their best interest to even go that far, right? If everyone already believes it, then they don't need to back it up, especially if it isn't like 90%. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't high, but it may not be that high, okay? There is no proof of it. So they're using a statistic that supports what it is that they are selling, right? And that happens with everything, trying to add credibility to what they're teaching to try to get you to take their class so they can get that money, all right? So all of that leads to the context, which is something that is important that you need to know when people are trying to sell you on their martial art. If you go to a gym and everything like that, make sure that what they're telling you is stuff about them and that place, because that's where you're going to be at, that's who you're going to be told by, that's what you need to know, not some random story or statistic about anything that doesn't quite matter, alright? You totally deserve to know this, you totally deserve better, and that's, you know, that's my whole deal. Okay, sorry for the long video now. I'm looking at my little timer now, kind of going long-winded. So that's this episode. Make sure you check out all my other ones, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, or not comment, but definitely subscribe, and check out some of my other videos on thedragonmethod.com. Okay, that's again thedragonmethod.com. That's where I teach people how to do martial arts. I teach people how to teach martial arts. I got everything on there, man. So be sure to check that out, because I've got some extremely detailed videos on that website. And also, this website is the YouTube/tkfmma. I'm trying to get in the habit of saying that more often, because some people don't watch. They just listen. Alright? But either way, as long as you learn, that's my goal. So, hope you learned something.